we've changed surroundings now, but that's fine. The Judge William Knight summed up by saying, this religious group seems to feel that they have some particular right to avoid the responsibilities of the laws of the land. It annoys the tripe out of me. The brethren hide under the privacy of the victims. Mr. Hales was terrified that the brethren would go and tell their stories to the Royal Commission of Australia.
Right.
And then it just says at the end, too much time has been spent covering things up, and now the brethren need to be held to account.
Most definitely. And need to be reported to the police.
Yep.
Directly and immediately.
Yep. And then a letter at the time of the review where Bruce Hales was just coming into power, and he endeared himself to us by overturning judgments. Like he said, my father should never have been put out of fellowship after he died posthumously. And so a few people were quite shocked at the audacity of coming back and saying, you can come back now, we got it wrong. But they would not
Forget everything we said before, come back, no questions, just come back. And bring your money.
Under the control of Bruce Hales.
And bring your money.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And your daughters if they're pretty.
Well, you said it.
That's what it looks like, isn't it?
Yeah. So, please note that the following was not stated in the acknowledgement. We are sorry for the way we abused you 25 years ago. We feel very guilty for our evil conduct towards you. We desire to be reconciled with you over the way we harmed you 25 years ago. We are responsible to correct the errors we have made, and we have made many serious errors. We have not forgotten the abusive actions we took against you 25 years ago. We now realise that our evil conduct towards you and others has become known to the public. We now realise that our conduct is a dishonour to the community in which we live, as well as an embarrassment to all Christians. They don't say this.
They don't say it, but they should have said it.
Yeah, yeah. Bit of light is getting dark here in this wonderful part of the world. Please note what the true meaning of what was stated was. 1. We remember the money you spent and the kindness you showed to others and us over the past many years, even though we try hard to forget. We now want some more of your money. Just like you said.
Just like I said. Yeah.
2, the Lord holds us responsible for all of the Christian churches in the land. The Lord is returning for us, the only perfect ones. We are redefining history. We never intend to get the facts right straight. We have forgotten what we did to you, but do know that we did great harm and hurt to you. I hope you have forgotten about what we did to you. We try hard to forget about it too. After these 25 years, are you now happy and pleased with the way we abused you? We do not want to impose on you, but if you do not do what we want you to do, you will pay for it. You can ignore this letter if you dare. We ignore letters all the time. And if you do, we will harass you. We will only meet with you alone, and there will be 2 of us. We want to be certain you have no witnesses, and with only 2 of us, we can easily agree to lies and distort what you might dare to say. We want to meet at your convenience, but when you call us, we will set the terms and the conditions for meeting. Be assured we are in charge. When we meet, I dare you to bring up any misunderstandings or faults, and we assure you nothing shall be cleared. They means that, in the next to last sentence, we just had a hard time writing a word that might suggest we have ever done anything wrong. Signed sincerely, meaning we sincerely hope we can abuse you one more time before you die, and please don't die on us before we can abuse you again. This letter, written by the brethren is loaded with misrepresentations and is less than truthful, you may draw other conclusions. I do not know if it is a letter. To me it is an example of ungrace. Only by grace, Victor condemn. And that just highlights the ridiculousness of the review.
Absolutely.
There was we should have been falling at the feet of those that we'd wronged and pleading for mercy and exposing ourselves and telling them exactly what we'd done and naming the sin. You don't just whitewash the sin and say come back to a bunch of sinners that don't understand abuse, you know?
Absolutely.
And somebody here...
Very bizarre.
Yeah.
I wonder what kind of responses they got.
Very few.
At all, yeah. Very few went bothered to reply.
And the ones that did were not really given any special place in the assembly. This was just a comment from another brother about what happened, and I don't think we've got time to read it all now. But
well, these can be put on a file alongside.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But then, lastly, I just want to go over the inside story of why the brethren had to read out statements in churches across the UK and in the Sydney, Australia area, agreeing not to have anything to do with me and my friend Richard Marsh and a couple of Noakes brethren who were deemed to be harassing the brethren. So this is the way they shut us down. Not very successfully, I may say.
No, clearly, very unsuccessful.
So my lawyers. So I went to Hales' house and brought to him and his wife's attention some cases of sexual abuse, paedophile stuff that I knew about and declared to him and he knew about in the UK.
Right.
And wider.
Goodness me.
So, of course, they didn't want to hear from me because they try and cover up abuse. So, they wrote back via the legal system, basically saying shove off. So my lawyers write back and say, we refer to your letter of the 15th of June to our client, Lance Christie. Mr. Christie has asked us to respond to your letter on his behalf, notwithstanding that there is no reason why he cannot communicate and correspond directly with Bruce and Jenny Hales. As you all know, Mr. Hales, as the minister in the Lord in the recovery, is a leader of Mr. Christie's religious organisation, the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. Both we and our client question why it is necessary for communications to pass through solicitors in these circumstances. And then Mr. Christie accepts that his letter states that Mr. Hales is aware of complaints of sexual abuse by members of the PBCC and of the failure of others within the PBCC to report such abuse and or to support the victims of such abuse. There's nothing wrong with Mr. Christie making this statement, as it is true. We provide more detail. Our client's letter also contains a request to Mr. Hales that he and Mr. Christie work together to seek to resolve the outstanding grievances from victims of abuse. Mr. Christie wishes to engage Mr. Hales in improving the support available to victims of abuse, as well as the reporting mechanisms in place when a victim reports such abuse to a trusted elder or member of the PBCC. Mr. Christie also considers that the manner in which members of the PBCC interact with outside authorities, for example the police and social services, must be improved, and that's proved in my case.
Definitely, yeah.
We know that was my case was 2023, and this is 2018.
Right.
All those years
5 years before.
They don't listen, you see. Don't learn from the lessons.
No, clearly.
We note that you consider our client's approach misguided, and that the relevant authorities should have been informed rather than Mr. and Mrs. Hales. We do not agree that the suggestion made by Mr. Christie to work to improve the matters referred above are in any way misguided. On the issue of police involvement, Mr. Christie understands that the police and other appropriate authorities have been involved in most of the instances of abuse which Mr. Christie is aware of. However, there have been no prosecutions or other action taken. Complaints have also been made by victims that individuals within the PBCC have failed to engage with the relevant authorities or have been encouraged not to cooperate.
Wow.
Aside from whether Mr. Hales engages with him or not, Mr. Christie considers that it is imperative that Mr. Hales and the wider sect take urgent action to improve the treatment of victims of sexual abuse, both with regard to the internal procedures in place and the provision of the necessary external support, with the perpetrators facing the appropriate criminal sanctions independently of any remedies the PBCC may choose to levy.
Absolutely. Call the police immediately.
Yes. On this issue, it is helpful to note there have been meetings and discussions between Mr. Christie and Mr. Hales in the past, where instances of historic sexual abuse were raised. During these discussions, Mr. Hales gave Mr. Christie the impression that he knew of the facts that our client referred to. So, as it goes on, as previous letters to Mr. Hales have gone unanswered, Lance was hopeful that Mrs. Hales would see the need for action, so he wrote to her, so that she would discuss these issues with her husband, and then a response would be received from either Mr. and Mrs. Hales or both. Because I involved Mrs. Hales this time.
Well, if he's not replying, it's logical you write to the wife, particularly with sexual harassment cases and sexual abuse cases, because if he doesn't care, she should do.
Yes. So, in accordance with the practices and teachings of the PBCC, as both Mr. and Mrs. Hales are aware, Matthew 18, 15 and 16 states, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their faults just between the two of you. That's generally a sin against you, but any sin really. If they listen to you, you have won them over. Reconciliation. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. In accordance with this, Mr. Christie intended to approach at least 2 senior PBCC elders or priests in the Sydney area with his concerns if Mr. Hales did not respond. Mr. Christie had not decided who he would approach, as he was waiting for Mr. and Mrs. Hales to respond. We can assure Mr. and Mrs. Hales that they would be reputable and long-standing members of the PBCC who would know Mr. and Mrs. Hales well. This is an established process within the PBCC which Mr. and Mrs. Hales will be aware of. Finally, our client will not agree to cease to communicate directly with Mr. and Mrs. Hales. He does, however, agree that for the time being, correspondence may be exchanged between solicitors' firms. Any suggestion that our client's correspondence amounts to harassment will be wholly denied. As previously stated, Mr. Christie simply seeks to correspond with his religious leader with regard to the PBCC. We await hearing from you, or alternatively, Mr. Christie awaits a response from Mr. and Mrs. Hales directly.
Logical.
Very logical.
Fair, yeah.
And then it was chased up later, on the 3rd of July, referring to the letter of the 3rd, chased up again on the 18th of July. Given that our client has not heard from you, and our client has not heard from Mr. and Mrs. Hales, our client intends to write to responsible brothers in Sydney in accordance with Matthew 18 as set out in our earlier letter. So, the very next day that I got a response, because they didn't want that happening.
Directly from Mr. Hales, or?
No, from his solicitors to Kingsley Nate Leeds, one of the toughest solicitors in the country.
Right.
To my solicitors in Leeds. Saying, you assert correctly that Mr. Hales is recognised as the leader of the PBCC. However, it is not accepted that Mr. Hales is the leader of Mr. Christie's religion. Mr. Christie was a member of the PBCC, but he was excommunicated from his congregation on the 3rd of October 2017. He has not subsequently been readmitted to the PBCC congregation or to any other PBCC congregation anywhere in the world. As such, Mr. Christie is not in fellowship with any members of the PBCC, and he is not in fellowship with Mr. Hales. So, I'd been thinking that if I took my place as one of the brethren, they would understand me. I'm not saying I've left and that you're a bunch of jerks and I'm okay, lads. I'm saying the opposite. I'm one of you, so make sure your practices are right.
I still count myself as one,
Yeah, because I hadn't been withdrawn from for any right reason. It was completely construed. I was construed.
And you didn't accept it, did you?
No. In these circumstances, Mr. Christie no longer has any role to play in the PBCC in any way whatsoever. And this was just this was July, 9 months after I'd been withdrawn from, not long. His attempts to interpose himself in the policies or administration of the PBCC are misconceived. The policies and administration of the PBC are matters for the PBCC membership in conjunction with the relevant regulatory authorities. They are not a matter for Mr. Christie. All PBCC members in the Sydney area have resolved that they do not wish to be contacted in any way whatsoever by Mr. Christie for any purpose, and those members have asked us to put Mr. Christie on notice of this. Please ensure that you immediately provide this letter to Mr. Christie, putting him on notice of their wishes.
Wow.
There is no justification for Mr. Christie to communicate with Mr. or Mrs. Hales or with any of the elders in the PBCC, whether in Sydney or elsewhere. Your construction of the letters that Mr. Christie delivered to Mr. and Mrs. Hales is not accepted, and the point concerning Matthew 18, verse 15 to 16 is contrived. We await your confirmation that Mr. Christie will not seek to communicate directly with Mr. and Mrs. Hales or any other PBCC members in the Sydney area or elsewhere. Now,
That's outrageous, isn't it?
It is.
Go away, we're not playing with you anymore. We're taking our toys home.
And my lawyer said to me, Lance, that reads as though a statement's been read out in Sydney and the area.
Warning people.
And I said, surely not, there's never anything like that happened in the history as I know. But then I heard that Hales was said to have the worst opposer in the history of the whole recovery. And then there was, to my shock horror, I found out there was not only statements read out in Sydney, and all the brethren had to queue up and sign a document or sign some bit of paper or something.
Sign confirmation of presence to have heard it.
Yeah, and they all had to come out. It's a very serious matter apparently, and I don't know, 600 to 700 brethren queuing up aisles, down the aisles, to sign this flipping bit of paper.
Goodness me.
And my lawyers wrote to all the churches across the UK, because we heard that they were read out in the UK as well, would you believe? So, under the Freedom of Information Act, this was later, we asked for information. Mr. Christie this letter is a request under Article 15 of the General Data Protection Regulations for you to provide us with a copy of any documents which mention or otherwise make reference to Mr. Christie. And that includes recorded information, recordings and recordings of meetings where Mr. Christie's name was mentioned. So we went to all that trouble, and I wrote letters to one and another, and just one out of hundreds was to Mark Hind of King's Lynn, not far from where you used to be in Lincoln. And this says, dated 24th of May 2019, Dear Mark, having been through the mill with you in matters appertaining to Jim Hutchinson and the consequent disposal of Phil and Mike Hughes, Phil's Hutchinson's father, Jim's father, I wondered, big boss,
big voice.
Big voice.
Oh,
he was the big boss.
Yeah.
I wondered whether you could use your clear influence as a trustee and also as a UBT director to insist on a thorough review of the injustice that has been thrust upon me by the brethren.
Yeah.
Phil Hutchinson and Mike Hughes clearly resented the fact that you and I involved ourselves in matters which they say were assembly matters, when all we were doing was trying to sort out a father and son relationship.
Yeah.
Everything went horribly wrong despite some initial help coming in, so in October 14 I was a recipient of a severe letter from Bruce Hales. This was followed with an assembly rebuke against me in January 15, which was repeated 3 times thereafter. My interview with Mr. Hales, it's actually 2 times, but then I was shut up. I'm not sure whether they rebuked me when they shut me up. They certainly said some pretty severe things.
Yeah.
My interview with Mr. Hales in London in June 15, which you kindly set up yourself, is all on record in writing, so I implore you to get hold of a copy to see how matters have been twisted against me. For instance, Mr. Hales said that I was mental and needed to go to see a doctor quick. The psychological pressure of this was enormous, and so it will help you to understand that a sincere effort on your part and mine to help Jim and Louise Hutchinson was turned terribly against me simply because we did not get step-by-step validation from Mr. Hales. Surely Bruce Hales is sufficiently broad-minded to accept help coming from other quarters, so can you help me as to what went wrong? I've been accused of creating divisions, sowing discords and other terminology, so having confided in you, Mark, I implore you to be brave enough to step forward and lead a review of this whole matter. Perhaps you could also advise me who you think would be a good person to lead a review of the Nottingham matter as well, because I don't really see why efforts to care for brethren should be turned against me. In saying all this, I will be open to adjustment should I be presented with witness facts. And then I enclosed the legal request from my lawyers as well. And then later I found out from somebody who'd left and was at one of these meetings where these documents were read out. Whilst total blanking and all communication was forbidden with Lance, who was clearly in the Champions League of opposers, what was the guidance given to those of us in the lower leagues? What was the instruction given to the Peeves to tell them to go out via the front entrance and sign their names? So, while we cannot draw any firm conclusions what it was all about, nor can say anything with any degree of certainty, we assume that this is what happened in every meeting around the world. But there are some quite important points to consider. By getting a reliable, eager beaver to please Hales, so that they do his dirty work and shield the trustees and the local heavies from any responsibility for keeping records and the accountability that fails them. So they get people who aren't actually trustees.
Yeah.
By saving the juicy gossip until the end of the announcement, where my name was mentioned and Richard Marsh's, immediately followed by collective signing, somehow the less initiated would one way or another feel that they were putting their names to the cause and defending the man of God and the assembly from the wicked man from Leeds.
Yeah.
So that was their assessment of it.
They just got, they got duped into signing this bit of paper.
Yeah. And, you know, it was all so official, and they were told they have to come out, and that it was, and I know one brother skipped signing it, so he got a visit later.
Wow.
You know.
Wow. He saw through it.
And I heard that other brethren were testing because they knew me, and had time for it, didn't want to do this.
Didn't want to get
but they were coerced into doing it. No wonder they've hidden it. No wonder they write back and say, basically it never happened, there was no information, because they were completely off it was completely illegal. And they were just out to get me.
Just
End off. Yeah. So to conclude, I've had to go over these rather awful matters. Got better things to do, but to save these people so they know what's going on in their own church, so that they don't do it to anybody else.
What worries me, I have to say, are the 55,000 people still there.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Under this spell, under this control, under these risks of losing their homes, their families, their livelihoods, on a whim of somebody in Australia deciding, I don't like that face anymore.
Yeah. And then they go through then after with a divorce, which was initiated by the PBCC. We had a good family, and then taking away the business and all the other stuff that goes on. And then, so I thought, well, we just need to expose the background and what builds up towards that. And they can't ever claim to anybody that they were trying to help me or save me or protect me.
They will claim that you've gone bad and you were evil and mental.
They've chucked me to the dogs.
Yeah.
And look, all things work together for good. I'm not complaining. I'm not a complainer. I'm starting a great new life.
Looking to help other people out before it's not too late.
But that doesn't mean that they can carry on doing this sort of crap to others. Just because I'm still smiling and I've come through it just about, and I'm immersed in taking them on because they will not repent. They don't know how to repent. Businessmen aren't known to repent, nor are lawyers, nor are the police, nor are government officials that are caught in.
They just need to be disbanded for the good of the members, basically.
Yeah, well, the hierarchy destroyed. Not destroyed, the hierarchy understanding that they've done wrong and repenting and taking a place, along with Bruce Hales and others, as a brother among the brethren and not influencing policy because they don't
need those layers of leadership when they can look straight at the scriptures. For their guidance, surely.
Yeah, exactly. They look to the greater and get a sense that they're doing what's right and feel clear in their conscience. And that's our link with God, basically.